everyone is asking the question after a 60% rise last year, but a rocky year end. What's your prediction for Bitcoin in 2022? Where does it go?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, none of this is financial advice. No one knows for sure. And if anyone says they know for sure, that's how you know that they don't know what they're talking about. But, I'm optimistic about it. And the things that make me optimistic basically are more regulatory clarity in the US and globally, which I think could help a ton, and institutional adoption. And I think those are also related to each other.
Let's talk about institutional adoption. How much faster do you see that accelerating this year in particular?
I think that, well, a lot of it depends on exactly what happens on the regulatory front as well. But I think that especially if places feel like they're getting clarity, that could come, in a tidal wave. It could come in a trickle. I don't expect it to come in a tidal wave in the next 3 to 6 months. Among other things, it just takes time for institutions to onboard to new platforms, to new asset classes. It's going to be a long process, probably stretched out over a few years. But the size of it could be really enormous. I think basically every large financial institution I've talked to, every large bank, every large investment bank, pension funds, they're all eyeing the sector. Many of them have started breaking ground on their activities in it. But it's just slow and it takes time. The onboarding and compliance processes here are not fast ones.
Well, and speaking of time, Bitcoin isn't a spring chick. I mean, Bitcoin Network launched exactly 13 years ago today, I believe. Yep. And you yourself just testified at this hearing on Capitol Hill about cryptocurrency and regulation. What are you preparing for? Is this year going to be the year, 13 years later, that real regulation happens?
I don't think it's all going to come like in one day on 1 year, but I do think that there's going to be a lot happening this year. We've already seen a lot happen last year, but a lot of that has been preparatory. We've seen a lot of different governments announce that there will be regulatory frameworks coming out over the next year. We've seen a lot of them make statements about crypto, and all of the major financial regulators in the United States and the lawmakers are investing heavily in their knowledge of the sector. I think that you're probably going to see the first batch of it coming out in 2022. I think you're probably going to see some clarity on stablecoin regulation. I think you're probably going to see some stuff about markets regulation with the SEC and CFTC. And I wouldn't be surprised to see some statements about asset issuances, although I also would guess that that's going to stretch over into the next few years.
Earlier today, there was a whale alert on Twitter that $20 million in Tether was transferred from an unknown wallet onto FTX. Can you confirm that? And if so, what does that tell us about the market?
So I don't know for sure. It wouldn't surprise me. There's something like $1 billion a day of stablecoins that come, through FTX. So that would not shock me. Tether, it's one of the most transacted digital assets in the ecosystem. Some people sometimes look at stablecoins moving onto exchanges as a bullish sign. Some people see it as inflows coming in. Similarly to how sometimes people see Bitcoin or Ethereum or other cryptocurrencies going onto exchanges as bearish, as a sign of sellers coming in. But it could be a lot of things. It could just be arbitrage happening cross-platform. And so it's, any one instance like that isn't necessarily that meaningful. But if you see a deluge of it, that could mean buyers.
Okay, the other big trend this year, of course, is the Metaverse. And so many people are speculating about what the intersection of crypto and the Metaverse actually looks like. What does it look like to you? What will the role of cryptocurrency in the Metaverse be? Yeah,
I mean, again, it's going to take some time, but I think that there is a ton of avenues. I think NFTs in video games is one of the largest. There are billions of users of video games worldwide. So I think that starting to see digital assets make an appearance there, I expect that's going to happen over the next few years. We've seen a lot of interest from the sector in that. I think that social media is going to start to interface with Web3. I think that could be a rocky process, and we haven't seen that many really concrete steps in that direction, although obviously Facebook rebranding to Meta is a step in that direction. I expect that we might see a cooling off, at least relatively speaking, of some of the pure NFT activity that we've seen recently unless and until we see sort of large names and players and partners come into the space. But I do expect that to happen, and that will be supercharging the next piece of Web3 growth.
FTX has certainly made a name for itself at the intersection of sports and crypto, whether it is baseball or basketball, or the Super Bowl commercial coming up, F1. Talk to us about the value of this, and where do you see it going?
Yeah, I think that the biggest things that we're looking at right now are basically getting our name out there, and starting to build out a brand. And I think that this is less about trying to immediately grow the user base. It's much more about letting people know who we are. We're really, really excited about a number of the partners that we've made, a few of whom are on the screen right now, and have been really great to work with. And I think that we see it as, look, we're new as a company. We're 2 years old, substantially newer than most of the players in the industry. That means that we're not a household name for a lot of people in the same way that some of the other players are. And I think that step one of that is us trying to communicate who we are as a company.